Wine Work and Passion is brought to you by the Napa Valley Wine Academy, America's premier wine school and two-time winner of the WSET Global Wine Educator of the Year Award. You can find a course that's right for you at napavalleywineacademy.com and use the code in our show notes for a special discount. Welcome, wine enthusiasts and job seekers. I'm your host, Karen Wetzel, and Wine Work and Passion is the podcast where we inspire you to make a career out of your passion for wine. Today, you'll meet Jodie Battles, Managing Partner and Beverage Director for the JK Food Group. You'll learn about her journey from part-time server to overseeing the beverage program at acclaimed Boston area restaurants Toro, Copa, Little Donkey, Faccia a Faccia, and Bar Polino. No matter where you are in your wine journey, this episode is packed with insights and inspiration to help you jumpstart your wine career with or without experience. I can't wait for you to meet Jodie. Let's get started. Hi, Jodie. Thanks for joining us on Wine Work and Passion. How are you today?
Hi, Karen. I'm great, thanks. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. I'm excited for our episode. So can you tell our audience who you are and what you do in the wine industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Jodie Battles. I am currently the beverage director and a managing partner for JK Food Group, which is a restaurant group out of Boston. We have 4 locations: Toro, Copa, Enoteca, Little Donkey, and our newest venture, Faccia Faccia and Bar Polino.
Now, are those 2 restaurants together? The Faccia,
Yeah, so it's Faccia Faccia is basically upstairs, and then Bar Polino is our little wine bar downstairs. So we open those together at the same time. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Well, we're going to talk a little bit more about those in a second, but that just dawned on me. I didn't know the answer to that. So the reason, as you know, the reason I wanted to have you on the show is we were connected through Lexi Sparrow, and so appreciate her reaching out from Mona Creative. And, you know, I like to bring, the audience knows, I like to bring people from all walks of life because it really shows that the wine industry is pretty vast. And that's what the show is all about, is working with wine, finding a way to make wine a central part of what your career is. And, you know, the restaurant, I come out of the restaurant industry, not to your level or degree, but but that's where I found my passion for wine really and used it a lot. And so I was really excited to hear the types of things that you do with your company. And I want to showcase that to the audience. You know, the nice thing about getting into wine through restaurants is there's restaurants everywhere, all around the country, all around the world. So wherever you live, if you're listening to this podcast, it's a great way to, get connected with wine through a career. So I think that's going to be very helpful to everybody. So my favorite question of the day: what was in your glass last time you had a glass of wine?
Yes. So my last glass of wine was actually at a staff training at Copa, Enoteca. So I had the Ettore Germano Rosanna, which is a sparkling Brut Rosé made from Nebbiolo from Piedmont.
Ooh,
yeah.
nice.
And, it's delicious, very like champagne style Brut Rosé, but really fun, different project. You don't always see Nebbiolo done that way. So the team at Copa was really excited about it. So it was cool to showcase for them.
And it was traditional method, I'm assuming?
Yes, it was. Yep.
People don't realize, there's so much more to Italian sparkling wines than Prosecco and Asti, right?
Totally.
And there's some beautiful dry wines made in the traditional method. So I had not heard of that one. That's cool.
Yeah, they're lovely.
I'm embarrassed to tell you what I was drinking. So I'll just tell you, before I had my glass of wine, I was drinking a Manhattan. So there you go.
I love it. Love a good Manhattan.
Every now and then, I just got to get away from wine. It happens.
Yes, fair.
Well, let's tell the audience a little bit about you. Where are you from? Tell us about your work experience and that kind of thing.
Sure. So I am born and raised on Cape Cod. I lived there my whole life. My mom's like 13th generation Cape Codder. So I have a whole big family down there on both sides. I spent some time, I lived in New Hampshire for a little while. I spent a long time in Charleston, South Carolina, which is sort of where I cut my teeth on all things wine and a whole different side of things in the restaurant industry. And now I've been back up in Boston for almost 10 years.
Oh, wow.
So Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I've been to Boston. Haven't spent a ton of time there, but it's such a great place. It's just too far. It's the other side of the world for me.
Literally.
So here in Napa. So yeah, it's really far, but it's really a beautiful place. So tell us a little bit about your wine journey and especially your wine journey through your career.
Yeah. So I had growing up in the Cape, I worked in restaurants in various capacities when, towards the end of high school, summers during college, but wasn't really doing a whole lot in wine. It was relatively basic in terms of the wine programs that we had and that we were offering. And when I moved to Charleston, I had gotten a degree in finance, and I was working for a real estate development company. And I was looking for something else to do sort of on the weekends, and because I was quite honestly kind of bored in what I was doing. And I had a friend from the Cape that actually had his aunt owned a wine bar in Charleston. It has since closed, but it was called the Levin Center Street Wine and Gourmet. And it was a small, like shared plates tapas menu. But that rather than a traditional wine list, they had a retail shop downstairs because
Yeah.
that's basically something you can do in South Carolina. Can't do it
Right.
everywhere, but it was restaurant and retail in the same property. So I was exposed to an unbelievable amount of wine rather than a smaller wine list there. And I had a really amazing general manager who sort of took me under her wing and started letting me steward wines and would, say, take home these 3 Pinot Noirs that are from all over the world and just try
Yeah.
them. And I found myself gravitating more and more to the wine bar. And at the time I was just serving, and I moved into some assistant management just on the weekend, helping out with events, things of that nature. But I ended up finding that it was an area that I had so much passion and I was so excited and I couldn't get enough of it. So I ended up leaving my finance job and diving in headfirst to all things wine and restaurant management. So I was there for a little while. And then I worked for another hospitality group in Charleston, and could just continue to get my sommelier certification through the court. I got my CSW through the Society of Wine Educators, and I continued to kind of couldn't get enough. So I
It is
was on the
addictive, right?
board.
Yeah,
It,
getting
yeah,
certified is addictive.
totally. So that was Charleston was really, it's a really cool city when it comes to food and wine and restaurants and all of that. So it was a great space for me to kind of cut my teeth and start really exploring all things and build my Rolodex in that way. So
Great.
I was on the board for the Charleston Wine and Food Festival down there a little bit, which was another really exciting thing to be a part of and have that much more exposure in all things wine. So restaurants were always still a huge part, but wine was such a big focus and just an area that was a passion for me that no matter what I was doing in restaurant management, having my hands in the beverage program was pretty much a non-negotiable in terms of what I was doing.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah.
That's interesting. Your story, every story is unique, but it's not really an uncommon one. In fact, my story is a little bit similar in that I was an administrative assistant for the American Cancer Society during the week, a Monday through Friday job, and I was bored. And I said, I think I want to be a cocktail waitress. I was living in LA at the time. I was 21 years
Yeah.
old and barely. And I just wanted something a little more fun and just something to do on the weekends. And ultimately, that was the spark that really ultimately led to me working in sales eventually. I went into restaurant management, and then I went into distribution sales and then wine education. And here are, 30, I don't want to admit how many 30 years later, but it's been a good run. And I think, the restaurant industry is such a great entrance into, you may not start off with a focus on wine, but if that's your passion, restaurant experience is very, very valuable. To me, I think so anyway.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it was really what created a pathway for me to be able to learn that much more about wine and be exposed to it in ways that is just such a cool experience to also watch people then enjoy it. You get to really see
Right.
it from start to finish, where it's not always the case depending on other areas in the wine world. So
Right. And it's interesting that you've got a lot of certifications under your belt, and wine education is more than just learning about this product. It opens the door to to learning about geography and travel and culture and food and religion and all those things. And I say this quite a bit, on the podcast and with my students. It's a big world of wine, and
Yeah.
so your passion can go in a lot of different directions. When you get in, you can take it in a lot of, like you said, your old boss gave you 3 bottles of Pinot from around the world. That's a great way to learn about all the regions of the world, right? And
Yeah.
the wine is a great for exploring. I think that's really pretty cool. So I know, in learning a little bit more about you leading up to the podcast, talk about your passion for organic wines, biodynamic, that type of thing, natural wines. Talk about that.
Yeah. So this has been a focus for me that's been an area that I've been super passionate about since I really got into wine, because even at 11 Center Street at the wine bar, we focused on small producers that were operating organically, really like, vineyard to bottle to everybody was doing this, everything all together. Uh, I have always looked at it kind of the way that chefs and restaurateurs have looked at things when it comes to sourcing from a farmer's market versus maybe a bigger food distributor. That it's like if you
Right,
have the opportunity to work with a local fishmonger, anybody that's growing local herbs, mushrooms,
right.
you name it,
Yeah, the
that's
pork, the pig farms, the farmers that have cattle, that kind of thing.
yeah, any
From a food
across the board.
standpoint. Right, yeah.
Yes. So that's sort of that same, for me, it was always rather than looking at larger commercial wineries or any kind of product, not that they don't have their own place, but it was just never an area that really I was seeking out. And then I continue to kind of take that much further as, um, in our most recent project, like for Bar Polino, we went fully organic, biodynamic, natural. That's the only thing that is in there on the shelves. Our chef, Ken Oranger, one of the partners and owners of the group, spent some time over in Paris a few years back, and he lived there for about 8 months and really just had a very exciting amount of exposure to smaller production wines that we couldn't even get here. But we were like, we have to open up a place that's like these caves in Paris, in Boston.
Right,
So trying to be able to showcase small business, all of those things, it kind of comes
right.
together and is that same philosophy when it comes to the wines that we're sourcing. It's about the people, it's about how they're practicing. It's not just about it being delicious juice in the bottle.
Right. And if that's your food philosophy, why shouldn't it be your wine philosophy? Why would you have that philosophy for food and then go out and buy a bunch of wines with mega purple or something? Like you just wouldn't do that.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Right.
Right.
So
Right.
that's where, having them be on the same page of the book is kind of our philosophy when it comes to the restaurant. So
Right.
I'm grateful that the chefs care about it as much as I do.
That's very cool. And while I've got you, and I know we didn't talk about this earlier, but would you mind, since we have your expertise in these topics, can you tell the audience a little bit about the differences between organic, biodynamic, and natural? Because those are a lot of buzzwords going on. The natural one, I think, is the most confusing. Well, at least to me, it is. But can you talk a little bit about what those things mean, how they're similar, how they're different, what
Yeah.
to look for?
Yeah, of course. So I always kind of break it down in different stages where you have commercial wine, and then a step up from that in like a pyramid scheme, for instance, would be organic. So that is going to be restrictive in terms of additives, in terms of the amount of sulfur, how practices are happening in the vineyards, whether it's herbicides, pesticides, things of that nature, that you can't, it's much less. So one layer less of everything. Biodynamics goes even more intensely from that, where it's not about just what's happening in your vineyard and with your grapes, but also what's happening in the surrounding vineyards in that area in a whole more sort of like fully ecosystem style. So it comes down to, if you like, makes me think of Mein Klang as a biodynamic farm that is in Austria, that they have, all kinds of cattle, they have different flowers planted. It's all these things that are looking at it as a whole and the grapes being a part of that bigger whole. And
And
also
is
no
that
additives.
because is that because the flowers and the foliage and the cows and everything feed the soils, or just
Yeah,
generally make for a better eco environment?
yeah, absolutely. Big time. And then natural is even that more where it's basically, a lot of it comes down to, there's a couple different like schools of thought when it's, the hard and fast rules of natural wine, but it's just minimal intervention is what it boils down to, that you're just growing the grapes, and it sounds like it's easier, but it's actually so much harder to try to do nothing and still have an amazing product at the end.
Right.
So some of it's, adding no sulfur or the parts per million gets absolutely minuscule in the natural element of things. But all of it being less is more.
Yeah. And to your point, I guess maybe it's not hard to do it, but it's hard to do it and come out with a quality wine. That I
Yeah.
think is the biggest challenge. And,
Right.
a lot of people, I think of biodynamic. When I first learned about biodynamic, and this was a long time ago, and I wasn't a wine educator. I knew a little bit about wine, but not just enough to be dangerous. And the person who explained it to me kind of blew it off like some sort of mystical, dumb, hocus pocus, moon and the stars have to line up. But the more I got into it, and they always bring up the thing about the cow dung in the horn that gets planted on a Tuesday during a full moon, blah, blah, blah. They exaggerate all of it. And then I started learning more about it. And it's like, okay, maybe they do take this horn and they do put cow dung in it and they plant it, but that's because there's microorganisms in there that's going to feed the soil and in a very natural way. And I started learning more about it. I'm like, this is not hocus pocus. It's actually just good, clean farming.
Exactly. Yeah. Same way. And again, I always related for people in the same way that it's like, if you know that you're buying organic tomatoes from your neighbors that have this farm that they don't add anything to, or you can go get something that looks absolutely perfect, but you don't know what went into it. Like that's the same thing. Like to your point, there could be deep purple in something that looks good, but that's not a grape.
Yeah. And then one more question, because natural, like you say, it's a little loosey goosey in that there isn't a really severe definition of, it's not really, the term's not really regulated that I know of.
No.
And so, there's a lot of potential different approaches at play. The other term we hear a lot about, and I think a lot of people sort of lump them together, is orange wine.
Yeah.
So what is the difference there?
So I think that's orange wine. I love that orange wine is like having a moment right now. Kind of reminds me of when rosé finally had a moment of, a while ago too, where it's, just white grapes that are done with skin contact the same way that red grapes are, used to make red wine or rosé typically. But a lot of people sort of, I think, have sometimes jumped on the bandwagon of orange wine being this trendy thing. And while a lot of people that produce naturally do make orange wines or these skin contact wines, not all orange wine will be natural or organic. Other people can make it that way. So that's where I always lean into, the importers that you trust and the suppliers and distributors and people that work with, if somebody like Mindclang, to go back to that, or whoever may be, is a producer that operates in a certain way and they're making an orange wine, then you know what you're getting into.
Right. So a natural wine could be a white wine with no skin contact, just like a normal white wine without skin contact. Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
So natural wine can be orange, but not always. And orange wine can be natural, but not always.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. Got it. Yeah. Yep. No. Yeah. I like to bring out those kinds of things, especially when I have an expert like yourself on, because, I teach WSET, and inevitably every class I get the question about the orange wine and the natural wines and what's the difference. And, and then we could throw in the word sustainable in there too, that kind of looks at a few more things like carbon footprint and, community projects and that kind of thing. That's just a whole nother kettle of fish, but, you can be sustainable and not organic. You can be organic and not sustainable. So there you go.
Right.
Another sort of parody there. But anyway, it's all very
many layers always.
Right. But but no matter what any of those terms was, orange wine is just a style, but natural or organic and biodynamic, those are low, really, really low intervention, very made very purely. And that's kind of the point. So that's great. Okay, so tell us, you kind of touched on it at the very beginning. Tell us about a little bit more about JK Food Group, your parent company.
Yeah. So JK Food Group is a restaurant group that is chef owners, Ken Oranger and Jamie Bissonette, hence the JK of the group. So we at this time they first were working together. They've known each other as chefs for a long time, but within this group, their first restaurant together is Toro, which is our Barcelona-inspired tapas Spanish restaurant, which actually just celebrated 17 years this year, which is
Oh,
exciting. Yeah, and this month actually even. They then went on to open up Copa Enoteca, which is our small little Italian enoteca, kind of like you would find at the end of a dead end road in Rome. So wood fire oven, handmade pastas, pizza. Arguably my favorite pizza, unbiasedly so, in all of Boston.
right.
And then we have Little Donkey, which we opened up 6 years ago, which is sort of more globally inspired small plates. And that's over in Cambridge. And then our most recent venture, which has been a long time in the works, we were really excited about finally coming to fruition this past May, is Faccia Faccia and Bar Polino. So this is our more coastal focused Italian restaurant. And then Bar Polino is the wine bar that is just downstairs in the same building.
Right. Now, you're mentioning these restaurants. Are they big restaurants or small restaurants?
So they there's a range for sure. Copa is our smallest. It's 10 tables inside, the same
Oh,
amount of bar
wow.
seats. Due to all things pandemic, our patios expanded substantially. So that was an added bonus.
Right.
So Copa's sort of like the little engine that could. It just like keeps going, but it can't expand much more. So it's a smaller seat. It's about 40 seats inside. Toro is more like 60 seats inside. So it gets a little bit bigger, but still pretty packed. It's very, very much so feels like you're in Barcelona, where it's like it's communal tables. Everybody's kind of in it to win it together. Little Donkey in Faccia Faccia are about the same size. But Faccia Faccia has a much bigger patio. We have like a 40-seat patio on Newbury Street in the Back Bay area of Boston. So, and then Bar Polino is it's about 30 seats. So it's a
Oh,
much smaller little sibling of the Faccia Faccia product.
yeah. So intimate wine bar kind of atmosphere.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
So a little birdie has told me these restaurants that you're involved with are not just the run of the mill restaurants. They're very prestigious. Can you talk about some of the accolades and awards?
Yeah, absolutely. So Ken and Jamie are both completely amazing chefs in their own right. Both are James Beard Award winners. Toro has won a handful of different things for best tapas with Best of Boston. Copa also has been in that same school, so lots of things for Boston-based awards in general. Best burger for Little Donkey. So there, we've been really fortunate for lots of loyal clientele that has been in our corner for a long time. And Chef Ken has been nominated for Outstanding Restaurateur nationwide with James Beard as well. So they've really been pivotal in terms of kind of creating the landscape that is the Boston food and restaurant scene over the past 20 plus years. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, that's very cool. And so talk about your specific role with what you oversee, what your title is, what your role is with JK Food Group.
Yeah. So when I started with these guys, I actually was living in Charleston, and as I said, since I'm from the Cape, I kind of kept my finger on the pulse of Boston for a long time. And I loved my time in South Carolina, but I just sort of felt like I wanted to be back in the Northeast. So I had a mutual chef friend who had actually told me they were hiring at Toro for a GM position. So I started with the group there back in 2013. I was doing the beverage program just at Toro initially, and then also took over at Copa, and then saw the cultivation of the beverage program from when we opened at Little Donkey back in 2016. At that point, I moved into wearing a few less hats and just doing the beverage specifically, and stepped away from some of the operational management of the GM role at Toro. So I've been in a beverage director role since then. And then I became a managing partner when we opened up this new property at Faccia Faccia Bar Polino, which also I oversee all the beverage there. So I oversee pretty much single-handedly with some help here and there, the wine selections and wine programs at all the restaurants. And then I also oversee the bar programs, but I have key people in place at each location that are sort of my right hand in all things bar operations and cultivation as well.
So they're the ones that report up directly to you.
Yeah. Yep. So there's a bar manager in place at each location that we still operate from a standpoint of it being very collaborative. So, and that goes for the fellow bartenders, myself included, everybody kind of has a hand in things as much as possible, but they report to me. And they also assist I pretty much oversee our entire educational program, but they have a hand in that as well and help with that at each location.
Can you talk about your educational program for us?
Yeah. So it's on our holiday break right now, which only happens, we do it for a little break in July and a little break in December, but we do basically like a beverage words every other week at each property, because with all four, otherwise it would be a full-time job. But it started out as wine words, and it's basically a 45-minute to hour-long sort of deep dive into some topic related to something in beverage. So, whether it's different sparkling wine production, something like orange wines and skin contact and tasting those from all over. It could be food and wine pairings. It could be blind tasting. It could be, tasting mezcals from various different areas. So a winemaker in town, you name it, kind of the list goes on. But we make a point to have...
These are live sessions in person.
Oh, yeah. Yep. So I usually teach at least 50% of them, if not a little bit more. And then we bring in other people so that they're not just seeing my face and learning from others, but live sessions that are mandatory for the team that they actually get really excited about too. So they're specific to each property too. So they change depending, between each of the restaurants. So it's relevant to that actual beverage program.
Right. And, and I'm glad we brought this up because, we think about being a beverage director. I know that that's a common term. And a lot of people think, well, that's the person who sort of manages the inventory and maybe writes the wine program, working with distributors and all that type of thing. But I think really is as important is, you can buy all the wine you want, but if your staff doesn't know anything about it, I mean, that's training and education is so hugely important. And, having been in wine sales, selling to restaurants for many, many, many years, that was always the first thing they'd cut back on or the last thing they'd make time for. And so as a distributor sales rep, I always felt like, well, this is my foot in the door because I can offer that complimentary for any of the products of mine they carry. And I would even go further. I wouldn't necessarily talk specifically to the other products on their menu, but in broad strokes, I certainly would give general education about Chianti Classico or whatever it was. And I will tell you, for you salespeople out there listening, that is an added value to your accounts, especially the smaller accounts where the owner or the beverage director is wearing every hat. They're washing dishes half the time. So, that's a really good skill to have to be able to educate your team. And it's also, I'm sure, what's led to the success of your restaurants is that you've got a well-educated staff. And that's hard to come by. Let me tell you, even in some of the best restaurants, you ask about wine and they just look at you like, I don't have a clue.
Yeah.
And it's also, if you're on the service side of this, whether it's bartender or table server or whatever, nothing will get you ahead faster than learning about all the wines. You have to learn about the food. The chef will demand and make you learn about the food. But in a lot of restaurants, they really think about the wine education more as an afterthought. So just take the initiative. And, when thinking about your journey, you showed an interest. And it was through that interest and your desire to learn and your ability to learn. So from a span of when you started on Cape Cod working part-time, I don't want to put a date on you. I don't want to ask you how old you are, but from the very beginning to...
Been a minute.
I mean, in broad terms, about how long did it take you to get where you are?
So I would put it in about, let's say like 20-ish years.
20-ish.
Right around
Okay.
there. Yes.
Well, I'll tell you what, and that sounds maybe to some people might sound like a really long time, but considering you were working part-time off of a full-time job, in high school, I think that's amazing. That's not a long period of time. I mean, I've been in the industry for like I said, well over 30 years. And I have lived a million lives in this industry. I've done everything. That's why I have this podcast, because I haven't done everything, but I've been connected to almost every job in the industry. And that's the other thing about working with wine. Once you start working with wine, nobody ever leaves. Nobody ever voluntarily gets another job. You might
Yeah,
change
it gets
companies here
across
and there.
you.
Right. And
Yeah.
even companies, most people I know, especially at the distributor level or restaurant level, they don't bounce around, like some other jobs. I always say supplier jobs, you have about a 7-year shelf life. But other than that, I did
Fair.
that too.
Very
I
fair.
actually lasted in the supplier job 13 years. So I was
Oh,
like a
nice.
cat. I just kept coming back.
I love it.
Oh, that's funny. So with the people that you hire, the bar staff that you are overseeing, what types of qualities do you look for in a new employee, or maybe even an employee to promote from maybe a different position? What kind of qualities are you looking for, and what types of things would you look for on a resume from a potential new employee?
Yeah. So for us, we do JK Food Group, and I'm a testament to that because my position didn't really exist until I was with the group. We are continuing to grow and always are looking to kind of foster that from within. So getting a foot in the door and then trying to, really figure out what you might be passionate about and then running with that and then continuing to be able to give people new opportunities is something we feel super passionate about. Everybody has to start somewhere. And then, if there's opportunity for growth or we find that there's a need for a new position or someone has moved or whatever it may be, we're forever looking at our internal team before we look elsewhere because that's the goal at the end of the day is for everybody to grow. So that sort of like self-start and motivation and that desire to learn and, wanting to take that initiative is something that we look for, whether it's internal or not. People that are looking to just kind of come in, collect their pay, go home is just not who we are as a group. Right. Everything is a pooled house. So it's also very important that you're in it to win it and you're there to really have an intentional effort and an excitement to be a part of what it is that we're doing. So people that are there for the right reasons and show that passion for the industry or elements of it that they are going to be focused on is something that's super important. And for me, it's also people that are excited to take part and really buy into that educational philosophy that it's, that we always like never stop learning is sort of a pillar in what we do as a group. So people that are understanding of the fact that there is always room to learn more and to also build up those around you. The restaurant industry is competitive by nature, but you have to continue to grow your team and mentor people. And having that mentality is really important, especially for me, for people that are in sort of a bar management and leadership role, that for them to be growing everybody from the bar backs to maybe the bussers who are helping them with glassware. And all of those people you're only as, good as you are as you're with everybody else on your team. So building up others around them and having that sort of mentality is really important. So that initiative and self-starting and mentality, wanting to have that mentorship, a total passion for, the craft and for food and beverage are probably the biggest things.
And I loved how you said intentional effort, that they're willing to give intent, or that they are displaying intentional effort. They're not just showing up. They're really intentional. And I think that is such good advice for any job. I don't care where you're working. You've got to invest. That's an investment when you're being intentional. And I think that's super important. Do you ever hire from outside your restaurant group, fresh, somebody coming from another restaurant, or somebody maybe you doesn't have any experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's where we've brought people on in the team that are, have never had a restaurant job before, have never had a bar job before. And if people are motivated and excited and driven and want the opportunity and are hungry for it, I would give that opportunity to somebody with that mentality over, some perfect glowing resume all day long, because having that sort of gumption and that effort and the desire is really, you can teach people things if they have that. So
Right.
we're always trying to give people new opportunities and hire from outside as well.
Yeah, I can say that, I always say you can teach skills, you can give people knowledge, but you can't teach someone how to have a personality.
Exactly.
They
Yeah.
either have
And
it or
that's,
they don't.
yeah. Even in our interview process, we always have a few people meet everyone too, because it's
Right.
like the energy and that kind of who they are as
Good
individuals
idea.
is really important in that
Yeah.
exact mentality.
Yeah. Are there key words that you look for on a brand new resume? Something comes across your desk. Are there key things that you like to see or that catch your attention more than others?
I would not necessarily more so. I mean, it's, I tend to look for people that have either grown somewhere and have tried to take on more than one opportunity at a location,
Mhm.
or that have, spent more than a certain amount of time there. You always like try to say cardinal rule, like stay somewhere for a year on a resume. And if not,
Right.
have an open conversation about why you didn't.
Right.
But just sort of showing people that have continued to try to progress is in whatever way that would be on a resume
Right.
is always something that I'm looking for.
And is it a plus that they've already been in a role where they're dealing with some kind of customer, whether it's a customer service thing or retail sales or some, maybe if not another restaurant, but something where they're connecting with customers? Is that a plus?
Yeah, I think that that's a huge plus. And that's especially, getting into the restaurant industry or the wine industry. If you've had other things where you're guest facing or clientele sales facing, whatever it may be,
Right.
those human face to face interactions are so key because
Yeah.
that sort of hospitality translates no matter what industry you're in, but be able to, provide that warmth and that kind of service
Mhm.
and is crucial.
Right. No, exactly. So, as we're getting, close to winding down here, can you tell our audience? I know there's a lot of people listening, thinking, "Wow, I want to follow in her footsteps, or I want to work for her group, or I want to work for a group like hers, or I want to be, work in the bar. I want to become a wine buyer." All those things that come under your umbrella or that you've done. What kind of advice would you give somebody who's just saying, "But I don't have the experience. I don't know how to get started." You got a couple of words of wisdom or some advice for them that they can do that they can start to act on?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say so. Some big things for me would be one, and again, this is still something that I believe right now, is arm yourself with education. If you have something that you're excited about, pursue those educational opportunities, whether it's certifications, whether it's just having somebody that is also wants to geek out about wine with you at home, whether it's, putting your nose in books that you love to read, whatever it is, but continue to educate yourself and know that there's always room to continue to do that. I'm still learning on a daily basis. The teams are. If you ever think that you've learned it all, you're wrong. So, arming yourself with as much education as possible is huge. And that kind of goes hand in hand with also network, network, network. That,
Love that.
as you've
Yeah.
said, and we totally agree, the wine world is so big and it can go in so many different avenues. And the best way to make that feel a little bit smaller and more manageable is to continue to meet people and connect in whatever way is possible. And you never know where those are going to take you, that it's
Right.
opportunities and doors open that could be totally different than what you would have expected. And, continuing to foster those connections and nurture those relationships and maintain them in any networking capacity. Even if you don't think it's an opportunity, it probably could be.
Right.
Um,
Yep.
yeah. And then lastly, I would say for me, something that I found super helpful was as I was trying to like figure out once I was like, I'm out of finance, this is what I want to do. I had to think about like some of the things that were most important to me at that point, whether it's, do I want to be home based or do I really want to travel? Or do I crave that face to face human interaction and, seeing people selling somebody a bottle of wine, seeing them enjoy it? Or do I want to be maybe seeing things on the back end and from a technical standpoint? So whatever, there's so much opportunity again, whichever way you decide to go. But if there's some very important elements for you that are sort of non-negotiables, that might dictate which way you want to go or what opportunities might be best for you.
Right. Right. No, I appreciate that. I want to back up to a couple of the ones you said. You talk about getting certified, and I'm obligated to give a shameless plug. So,
As you should.
So, for in the audience, most of the audience is connected somehow to the Napa Valley Wine Academy, but we are the largest wine school in the world, except for London. We've won
It's
the
amazing.
Educator of the Year twice from London. We're the only school that's ever done that. And we certify more Americans than any other school in America. And our scores are actually higher than the averages around the world. So if you're interested in getting certified, WSET, the reason we talk about, we have other courses, but take something with a little certificate or a certification. And nothing is more recognized around the world than WSET to get your feet wet. You can move on to CSW and quartermaster and all that other stuff, but WSET is kind of becoming the brand standard for almost entry into almost any arena of wine. So anyway, look us
Absolutely.
up, and we have most of our classes are available online, so you can be anywhere in the world and take classes from us. So anyway, check that out. The other thing, you mentioned networking, and I really think that that's super important. And it could be as simple as, if you live in an area and there's a really great restaurant with a good wine focus or a cool wine bar that you want to work for, go sit at the bar and talk
Yes.
to the bar guys, to the bartenders, the gals, talk to them and pick their brain and express your interest, and, throw around a few wine terms and, show your wine chops, and they'll turn you on to the right person. It's a
Yeah.
really good way to get a little bit of notice when you maybe couldn't otherwise. And also, we touched on it a little bit earlier. Get a little bit of experience working with customers, especially if you can do it in the wine industry. If it doesn't have to be a fancy schmancy restaurant, somewhere that has some wine where you're going to serve a little bit of wine, but get that under your belt, and not just so that you can say you have the experience, but when you start working in restaurants, you get a tremendous empathy for the customers. You start to really learn that, and you also really start to learn the inner workings of a restaurant. There's so much more than the general public knows, until you get in the back of the house and you know what's going on when you work there. So I think, if you're interested and you really are truly a beginner, get that part-time job. There's plenty of places that'll hire you on the weekend if you're in finance, as you were, or admin like I was, and just take
Yeah.
the plunge. That's a good way. I mean, it worked for you and I, and most everyone I know
Totally.
started that way. And never stop learning. Boy, that is so important. That's one of my favorite hashtags when I post on Instagram.
Yeah. Got it.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, Jodie, I don't know how to thank you enough. Truly, you have been very inspiring. And I think really through this whole conversation, you've given some really good points for people to act on, and not just here at the very end, but we talked about a lot of things, and you shared a lot of your expertise, and I think you've opened the door and opened people's minds to where some possibilities are that they wouldn't have ever thought of before. So thank you so much for being so open and so engaging with us. We really appreciate it.
Oh, no, thank you, Karen. It's truly been my pleasure to be on here and chat with you. And I hope that it is something that is beneficial for all the listeners. And
Yeah.
it's
I
an
I
honor.
can't, I can't wait to get the feedback. And of course, I want to thank our audience. We have a very loyal following here at Wine Work and Passion, and we really appreciate it. We love having you guys here, and hopefully you have some nuggets to take away, and a few of you will act on them. So that would be great. Anyway, we're on to the next interview, guys. So stay tuned for the next one. Thanks again, Jodie. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Karen.
Thanks to all of you for joining, and I hope today's show has inspired you to make a career out of your passion for wine. If you'd like to have a one-on-one career coaching session with me, just use the link in the show notes for more information or to schedule an appointment. This podcast is all about helping you follow your dreams, so feel free to send us your suggestions for guests or topics through our email link that's listed in the show notes. And it means an awful lot when you share us with friends or leave a review on iTunes. Thanks for listening. I hope you'll join us again for our next episode.